Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to kick off this session. My name is Bill Betten, and I'm president of a medical design consulting company, finally after many years of working in the industry. And we're here today with a great panel to talk to you about innovation and speed and whether they're the same or not in the medical industry. So I'd like to put that in context, and then we're going to launch right into the panel. So as I said, my background is I'm a double E and a physicist way back when, and for me, starting my career, innovation was working for Honeywell, and DARPA was paying us to do stuff that had never been done before, things like gigabit per second fiber and submicron technology in semiconductors. Wow, I mean, now I'm really dating myself. Fast forward, I joined a company called 3M, slightly known for their innovation, and I had the great fun of running an internal service organization that got to play with some of the brightest and most innovative people in the world. Fast forward then, I decided medical was for me and spent a lot of time working for OEMs and lately contract design and manufacturing companies, working with partners, all who wanted products better, faster, cheaper, with emphasis on faster and better usually. So that gives me a long career of looking at innovation, and we've got some great panelists this morning who are going to talk about that, and I'll introduce them in just a moment. But in order to set the context for it, there's a book I read, The Myths of Innovation by Scott Birkin, and it's a very interesting one, and it talks about the challenges that innovators face. And while a bit generic, I'm going to use those to set the stage, and then we're going to dive into the introductions for the panel and the discussion. And they include finding an idea, obviously, developing a solution, sponsorship and funding. For those of you who are startups out there, that probably is your number one issue right now. Reproduction of that idea, being able to do it more than once, getting out to potential customers, beating the competition, timing, are we the right idea at the right time, and finally keeping the lights on while you're trying to do all of that. So that makes for a bit of an interesting challenge. With me to explore that today is a very talented panel. I've gotten to know them in our discussions getting ready for this, and they'll introduce themselves and deal with one of the questions here in just a minute, but I will run through them very quickly. To my right, your left, or to your right as well, Annie Cashman is the Global Segment Manager of Medical and at Proto Labs. Next to her is Scott Thielman, who's the CTO and co-founder of Product Creation Studios. Next to him is Jeff Wyman, Vice President of Inventures at Smith & Nephew Advanced Surgical Device Division. And on the end, and unfortunately he joined us late, so his picture didn't get on the chart here, is Jeff Grosse, who's the Chief Science and Technology Officer at Canary Medical. And they'll each be discussing what brings their unique viewpoint to this. So among that, we have service providers, we have, and a couple of OEMs, so you're going to hear about innovation from their perspective. So what I'd like to do, panelists, I'm going to ask you to each spend a couple of minutes introducing yourself, and I'd like to set the stage by asking that question for you to follow up on. Our innovation and speed, particularly in the medical world, which will be our focus today, really equal, or what are your thoughts on that? So Annie, go ahead.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate the trip out from Minneapolis at 15 degrees to Orange County, California in December. I know Calif does as well. So I am the Global Segment Manager for Medical at Proto Labs, and basically what I do is set the strategy and vision of our medical offering to our customers. Proto Labs is a market leader in rapid prototyping, but we also do quite a bit of production work for our customers as well, and it's been a really fun ride. Proto Labs has grown in the double digits for the past 7 to 8 years, and now that they're starting to answer the question who they want to be when they grow up, they realize that a big chunk of our customers are medical customers, and they have brought me on to kind of help shape that vision for our customers. So really exciting time, very exciting company to work for. Many of you are our customers, so I say thank you for that. You've all been very instrumental in our growth as a company. To answer the question, are they equal? Well, considering I work for a rapid prototyping company, I probably should, have a pretty strong opinion on this. But I would say that our patient will always drive innovation, and we're very, in speed sometimes can be a great vehicle and help to that to get a new product to market quicker to help the patient and drive innovation. I think that's, but I think they're not equal. I think the idea will always drive the pace, and the patient, then the idea. And if we can offer products and services to accelerate that safely and efficiently for our patients, absolutely. I think it's very important. I think having a buttoned-up supply chain with your customers is very important. That will also drive that. But no, I think innovation is in the world that we get to work in, which is, I think, one of the most exciting and important industries in the world is in medical. I think innovation is very, very important. We're not making a car that needs to go faster. We're not making a computer or an iPhone that can add the other widget quicker than than Samsung. We're impacting patients' lives. So I think innovation will drive, our decisions. And I think that if we can help our customers be quicker, great. But at the end of the day, the patient innovation is most important. So that's my take on it.
All right, thank you. Scott, introduce yourself and address that question as well. Thanks.
Yeah, happy to do it. So I'm Scott Thielman. I'm CTO of Product Creation Studio. We're a development, design, and engineering firm up in Seattle, and spend most of our time marketing out here on the West Coast, but have clients all over the country and a few beyond the borders of the country as well. We offer services to the innovators out there in the medtech space who are trying to bring their novel products to market. And our teams, we put together teams that suit their needs. And if there's kind of some of the unique aspects of us, or maybe unusual, I know there's a lot of folks who play in this space, but we offer a really broad range of expertise. And so with the interest in design and getting the usability right, we've got that under one roof with the more rigorous engineering disciplines, mechanical, electrical, software, and manufacturing expertise. And so we put a lot of thought into how to innovate. It's why this is a great subject for us to participate in and have a perspective on. But we are a service provider. I think that's important to know, and we come from that perspective. We've been around since 1999 doing this, have invested in both our innovation processes, our project management processes, to get our ISO 13485 certification for our quality system, so we can effectively play in the space. And making those kind of commitments is what we do. Is one of the aspects of we're always continually improving. I know that sounds cliche, but it's one of the areas that PCS it really shines. So this is a really great question. I have to agree with Annie in a lot of sense. I think innovation and speed are not equal, but definitely relevant, and possibly speed can be a characteristic of innovation in a lot of sense. They're kind of tied together by this aspect of newness. And when we innovate, by my definitions, we're bringing new solutions to painful unmet needs. And particularly in the medtech space, these are serving patients' needs, serving the providers' needs, the users' needs, and trying to do it in a way that has these great outcomes. So I think of this aspect of speed as being important, right? We want to get, from a business standpoint, we want to get to market quickly, and I think a lot of our customers come to us looking for that type of speed. That's a value proposition to them. But my belief is the trick to innovation is putting the teams in the right mindset, and there's portions of that process where we kind of have to move at the speed of human, not digital, not the internet. And so we have to know when to stop and go. So go slow sometimes to go fast. And so I think it's good to decouple those things. Know that both speed and innovation are important, but know when to put the foot on the gas. So it kind of depends.
Okay, thank you. Jeff Wyman, want to introduce yourself and give us your thoughts on speed and innovation?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Wyman. I'm with Smith & Nephew, and I'm based out of Boston. I want to thank Brian for having me here today, and Bill setting this session up. Smith & Nephew is a company based out of London. It's one of the larger orthopedic companies that we know in the area of orthopedic medical devices. We also have a wound business, but my area of focus from a business perspective is managing the ideation of the customers that we have from around the world and creating an opportunity for that innovation to fold into our standard franchise businesses. So we build product three ways at Smith & Nephew. We build it through our big strategic franchise businesses. You may hear and read about small or large-scale acquisitions that may occur. And the third way is through the problems that a lot of customers or caregivers have with problems that they have in the operating room on a daily basis. And so our remit is to manage an inflow of ideas that can average upwards to 600 or 700 a year from customers around the world. And probably 95% of them end up in a trash bucket because they end up not necessarily fitting the strategic market needs of the business, or they're not fitting into a right reimbursement strategy or a regulatory strategy. And so it brings up the points that the previous speakers made about fitting in the cogs of the wheel so that the engine can run smoothly. And it used to be 10 or 15 years ago when a lot of these spaces were growing really, really rapidly. You didn't have to worry much about cogs. You didn't really have to worry much about regulatory challenges as you see now. You wouldn't have to worry about medical device regulations as we see now in Europe. And so these are all things that are cropping into our minds as we're going through the path of innovation. And I think that from my chair, it's not necessarily speed, but it's a matter of persistent pace. And an example I can give is that we have a fail fast, fail cheap model, particularly as we're evaluating new ideas that come in. And so to be able to evaluate new ideas for their intellectual property merit, thrusts into the marketplace, costs that the end user would end up paying for a device, it's important to have a good system set up to be able to manage those three parameters, because ultimately the device has got to fit into those three buckets, regardless of how innovative it is. So in my opinion, it's a matter of having a good team that's aligned, that you have a pacing thrust, that you can see direction occurring in all elements of a project.
Okay, thanks. And finally, Jeff Grosse, introduce yourself and let's tackle that one too.
Hi, thank you for having me here, Bill. My name is Jeff Grosse. I've been told I'm this Jeff's evil twin. A late entrant, but happy to be here. I'm currently Chief Technology Officer for Canary Medical. We're a medical device startup company based out of Vancouver, British Columbia, and our focus is smart implants in the orthopedic, cardiovascular, and aesthetic spaces, so implants that can generate data on functionality of host implants. With that, we also have a system for transmitting and then the analytic platform on the back end to not only analyze the data and share it with the healthcare team, but also monetize that data, where we feel that data in itself is a product. I think to the question, it's interesting in that, does speed equal innovation? Is it greater? Is it less? I think it depends on your vantage point and what you're trying to achieve. If you're looking at incremental technology or technology that can improve workflow, where the regulatory hurdle is somewhat lower, then I think speed is critical, innovation and critical, they're probably equal. I think as you move down the spectrum towards revolutionary technology, which is disruptive and displacing, it's kind of what Jeff said, fail early, fail fast. I think the speed and innovation is get to the point of proof of concept or first clinical trial to assess it, and then it grinds to a halt. And that is because of the regulatory process and what is now needed. I think the days, we've all spent 20 plus years in the medical device industry where you could change a coating, you could change a chamfer, you could push it out the door rather quickly in a 510K or similar process, upcharge 10% and life is good, is pretty much over. And so if you're trying to produce a product that is disruptive and you're arguing for an increase in ASP, you have to have the data to support that, and that requires a higher burden of proof. And the hospital CFOs simply aren't willing to pay that upcharge unless there's that proof. So I think in that spectrum of incremental to revolutionary or disruptive, to get to the point, speed is critical, innovation critical, but then it's going to slow appreciably.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, we've met our panel now, and we've started teeing up the question. Now we're going to dive into it, and the panelists and I have met and talked about this a bit, but we're going to share our observations. But be thinking of your questions, because at the end of this, we're going to save about 5 to 10 minutes for you to ask your questions of the panelists, and I know we'll all be happy to answer your questions afterwards as well. So, Jeff, you kind of teed this up a little bit, and let's talk about how do we really measure innovation in the medical context. All of you touched on it in one way, shape, or form. Jeff, do you want to, I'm going to start with you down on the end, and do you want to amplify on that, and how do we measure innovation in today's environment? Because speed to market may be it, some miracle cure might be it, but how do we measure innovation in medical? And you touch on it, so why don't I let you continue and we'll work our way back up this way.
Okay. You know, I think it all starts with understanding what is the unmet need you're trying to solve. And there are a variety of unmet needs throughout the spectrum of medicine. It could be anything from a process flow. If you talk to nurses in an ICU, they have bells and whistles, beeps going off incessantly, which is more of a distraction than anything. So a software that can integrate all of their information in an informatics standpoint and give them the go, no-go, the up and down signaling to manage their situation, that could be truly innovative. It could be a clinical unmet need in that there is no solution today. So you think of, and tomorrow we'll hear from Stan Rowe at Edwards about the TAVI heart valve. So the clinical unmet need in that situation was patients who could not tolerate a heart valve replacement because they were too elderly, too infirm, they couldn't stand cardiopulmonary bypass or wouldn't have a good chance of survival. So there's a solution of how to treat that, and that is then rippling backwards through the industry as a whole. So I think understanding what that unmet need is and then looking for the solutions. And I think it's incumbent upon we as the medical device community working with clinicians and allied health is to find the best solution. And sometimes the best solution is disruptive. Sometimes it's what we would call a pet rock idea. I was involved in an example of a technology in a past life called Quill, which is a knotless suture. I mean, think of how many times people tie knots. And there's a situation of, because you didn't have to tie a knot, you had procedures that would take 6-7 hours that were cut down to 30 minutes. And so it really comes down to answering the question of the unmet need.
Okay, Jeff Wyman, I want to build on that a little bit and take a slightly different tack, and we'll work our way down. But when you and I talked, one of the things we talked about was efficacy and proof that something's working. So could you maybe take us down that theme a little bit with regard to measurement of innovation and the difference in our industry? We have to show that it works. So can you comment on that and how that plays into innovation?
Yeah, so I think the clinical benefit can be demonstrated in two basic ways. The first being obviously an efficiency to care. You know, in the example that Jeff just gave about the Quill suture, the efficiency to care was to drive down the operating room time in order to finalize the end part of the procedure. And so you could demonstrate that pretty clearly by time savings and cost savings. Secondly is the clinical benefit. Does the patient get better? And do they get better demonstrably so compared to what the mainline gold standard form of treatment is? Interestingly enough, coming into this discussion today, the title of this is DeviceTalks, but I also would submit that there are components of a known procedure which are only the device, but the end-to-end procedure is much more of interest to the payers and to the hospitals than just purely the device itself. So there are elements of a procedure which actually can demonstrate benefits of a predicate device that's been in the market for a long time that could be improvement in care and vice versa. So I think a lot of times we think about just the actual implantable device or just the actual vehicle that would drive an implantable device. But thinking the end-to-end procedure is really where the measurement and innovation can oftentimes be impactful.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Scott, what are your thoughts on how we're measuring innovation in the medical context?
Well, I have I'll let you judge if it's good. I have an example client that might raise some of the thinking about it in today's market. This was a client we've worked with for quite a number of years, bringing, they're called Lumithera. They're bringing a treatment for age-related macular degeneration to market. And this is a market where we talked about unmet need. There aren't that many therapies for AMD, and so there's a lot of excitement from the practitioners in this industry where the Lumithera device gives them an option to treat these folks. It also represents maybe a profit center in their clinic, and so there's a lot of reasons why this company should succeed. And the reason I'm still on the edge of my seat with this company as I watch is that they're just getting their approvals right now. They're halfway through a clinical trial. The intermediate data looks promising. They're wrangling with Health Canada to get on market there. I think they've gotten their CE mark, and so they're going to start marketing this device. And I can't say that they've really innovated in an impactful way until they've got this device out there to meet the need, right? And so that means that they also have to have a sales, have to figure it out, negotiated the path, getting this product to market in the right way that they can make money to keep doing it. There's so many ways to fall down in the healthcare space these days because of the complexity of the market, the regulatory, the payment reimbursement structures, and of course, what we're mostly concerned with is the technology. But my point is, we can do our job on the technology, and there could be other reasons that Lumithera might stumble along the way, and how they price their service, or maybe they're stepping on somebody else's foot on the reimbursement side. Remains to be seen. I think their shots are really good, and 95% they're gonna hit it. But I think I think there is this aspect of where we have to look at real impact. Means that you got the product out there, and it sustained a business as well as just a good design.
Okay. Annie, you're going to get a slightly different slant on this because it was brought up that it's not just a device. This is DeviceTalks. But one could argue, and in this world of fail fast, and I'm an optimist, I prefer to think of it as succeed quickly. Your company has innovated process and has helped change the way those of us who design products do things. So maybe innovation from you from a process perspective and how it improves a product might be a topic you might want to touch on.
Yeah, one of the things that really excites me, we can talk about the Affordable Health Care Act and how we all feel about it one way or another, but I do believe one huge benefit is the staff is starting to be thought of more. Like you said, it's not just about the device. It's about the nurse that's touching our device. It's about the scrub nurse that's putting it together. All these people that are now kind of brought into the ecosystem of medical are being thought about. So when we talk about building a device, and every project that I get brought into, I should have said this before, I actually sold medical devices, and I've now worked on the prototyping, so I've seen the whole development cycle. And yeah, the fail fast is really important, but what I really like, and where I get brought in a lot, is I get to say, okay, this is a really, really good idea, XYZ engineer, but do you understand that you're making a device and the lights are going to be off? So they need to be able to see it. But there's like little things like that where we have all these ideas and they're great, but I think now more so than ever, everybody who's touching the device is being thought of, because every minute of time we have in the clinic and the OR is now being tracked. So it's really fun on my end of it to help new product engineers really think about the end solution, and that's the patient, but it's also everyone who's touching our device. And I think that's now being brought to the forefront more than any time. To Jeff's point, it's not just the device, it's the whole process.
Okay, well, let's move on. We've touched a little bit on the products and innovation and speed and that sort of thing, how we measure it. But what about organizational structure? Let's talk a little bit about what your companies have done or what you've seen and observed for how you're dealing with innovation. And Jeff Wyman, I'm going to start with you because your job in particular focuses on internal development within Smith & Nephew. So that's kind of interesting. So let's start there from an organizational perspective. How do you organize to innovate?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Obviously, looking from the outside into a big company, one from the outside looking in would say, well, you have, all those scaled resources, right? You have quality, you have regulatory, you have manufacturing engineering. You've got an operations plant, and so it's pretty easy to get done. But the reality of it is that all those resources are more or less cordoned off and maybe supporting other functions within the organization versus yours. So in some cases, when you have your own and when you're aligned appropriately, things are a little bit easier. But I will say that what we try to do on the front end is when we're scoping a project, and it's an engineer who's scoping a project, that he's thinking about the operational component of that project long before he ends up having to go out to an operational entity, whether it be a vendor to quote a price, or whether it be our own internal group. And so the kickoff meetings that we have involve realistically a very broad swath of the people that you think are going to impact the pace of a project from beginning to end. And so it's important that regardless if you're doing it on the outside or you're doing it on the inside, and whether you own those resources or whether you're actually hiring those resources, that you get them involved up front as quick as possible.
Okay. And I'm going to bounce back to Jeff Grosse on that same question, because both of your companies, on the end there, represent really the med device companies. Then I want to come to our service providers and talk about something a little bit different. So, Jeff Grosse, from your perspective, organizational infrastructure inside a med development company, what are your thoughts and how do you structure for innovation?
So, as a startup, it's quite simple. I mean, you're running a deficit because everything you're doing is going towards innovation. And you're hoping for the outcome, which is a good product. And it's really about careful management of your dollars and how do you spread them across using a range of consultants, looking at IP strategy, and it's about optimization to meet your goals. I think in the larger company, and I've spent time with very large companies as well, with Medtronic and CareFusion, and I applaud Jeff's model. I think it fundamentally comes down to if you have an innovation or incubation center, it's got to be isolated or separated to a certain extent from the day-to-day line management. There's just too many competing pulls on people's time. I always have a funny saying that, when the manufacturing engineer comes in the office for that day, their first job is to man the line, keep the line up and going, keep quality up and going, get products up and out the door. So if I'm in R&D and I come and want to use some of their resources to, hey, I've got this great idea, I'm probably 3rd, 4th, 5th, 10th down their priority list, as it should be. And so having this segregated is a huge benefit. And what is implicit in that is the buy-in from the C-suite. They're structuring their organization to allow that to happen and to protect that resource so they can have that level of innovation. I think in the big company as well, it's critical to have, when there is an idea that comes across, there's got to be that linkage into the line management through sales, through general management of if that idea works, there's got to be a catcher. You're pitching it, there's got to be someone to catch it. And so having a very simple way to look at what is the product, what is the claims that you hope. You haven't built it yet, but in your mind's eye, what would be the claim language you could achieve that will tell the salesperson what they think they can sell on. And having a simple forecast, no one's going to hold you to it, it's not a blood oath, but understanding COGS, understanding the basics, it really can be done on a one page. Unless there's that buy-in, you're pitching, no one's catching, it's doomed to fail.
Scott and Annie, as service providers, you guys
Question.
are working, go ahead.
Just a point that, to emphasize from what Jeff said, from a co-development perspective, there are situations where you're working with OEMs, whether it be on the front end design engineering side or the back end from an operational perspective. And I think it's important to ensure that, going back to the original question, right, of timelines and deadlines, so that an OEM can understand what really the end goals are. So that communication up front is the reason why we want to get this done is so we want to move into some form of testing so that we can submit on time a notification for CE marking of a particular component of the system. So whether you're working with your own teams internally, or pulling in a team from outside, it's really important to have those front-end goals of timelines and deliverables established so that everybody understands why we're trying to get to where we're going before this is all said and done.
I see Annie's raising her hand,
Yeah,
and we're
I
going to
mean,
build on that. Go ahead.
I would say that's the most important part of any project, especially when you're dealing with an inside and outside group, is communication of goals of what the project are and the outcome right away from the first or second meeting. And that's not to say they can't change, but if you're picking an outside vendor like myself or a contract manufacturer design firm, to have a core team meeting and sit down and say, yeah, these are our goals, this is the problem we're trying to solve, and really treating it like a partnership will save you so much time. And to the first question, this speed equal innovation, I can't tell you how many times that I've been involved in projects that we think we know someone calls and an engineer calls and says, this is our goal, we want you to develop this device, and we're all excited. We used Proto Labs, and they gave us 6 different iterations, and we get there to the big core team meeting, and they said, well, what about the other 6 materials that this device needs to work with? Do you have a solution for that? And we all just go, oh, because you just worked 5, 6, 7 months on something. So really vetting out your partners and working on the communication strategy from the first point of contact is so key. And being candid, and treating your partner, your partners as true partners and part of your team will save you so much time and effort.
Okay. And Scott, I know as a contract service provider, and you and I have talked a lot about getting involved early on, you get to build on both these thoughts: early engagement, resolving the requirements, and then the partnership aspect. Why don't you comment on that?
Yeah, happy to. And I think this is one of those areas where I use that term. I'm actually stealing the term from the event we were at last week, but go slow to go fast. And it's about have that meeting, do that research at the initiation of your project, because of course you can pivot, and good teams do pivot throughout towards to go towards on a better path, but the decisions you make early on have a lot of leverage over how resources are spent over the next coming months and years, and making those decisions with the best available information, which includes from your team or from outside teams, bringing in experts, pausing to, we're starting one surgical project right now, and yeah, it took us a couple weeks to find, reach out to surgeons in this space, get them in, interview them. This is time we could have just been running towards the goal, right? So some people might look at it and go, hey, you're wasting time, you're treading water here, not making any progress. But we think setting that up, getting a surgeon's time, which is really hard to do because they're super busy, talking with them, interviewing, getting the data, either confirming or refuting assumptions that were made, and writing those down, being kind of methodical in these first stages. It's really hard, can be really uncomfortable in a client service provider relationship to be telling the customer to slow down, but this is the part you want to get right, because you're going to divert a lot of resources into the findings, into the strategies that these findings describe. And so that's where we want to be methodical. And as you dig into the project, now we can find ways to parallelize and bring timelines in, because we know what we're marking. Now we want to get that first prototype. Now we're in the build, test, learn, lean cycles, and let's make those as tight as we possibly can, right? So that we can get validated learning. And I can't remember the other part I was supposed to
It'll
answer,
come
but
back
I'm sure
in a
it'll
minute,
be.
yeah. Jeff, you look like you were winding up to add to something on this. Go ahead.
Just one of the comments. I think that the project definition is critical. The way we've always looked at it is by forcing a discussion of claim language. It actually is a segue into not only how you sell the product, but how you approve it through a regulatory process, and will inform your design decisions. So, if you're going down a 510K path, well, that immediately says certain things and implies certain things about a design. Because if you say you're going to go down a 510K, my next statement is, what are your predicate devices? Which, again, then helps. So to me, it's a useful but painful exercise. And until people are comfortable with that dialogue, you usually get the 1,000-yard stare. And the response is, from a lot of the sales force, is how can I provide a forecast when I don't have the product. And when you talk to the R&D people, the usual response is, well, I don't know what material I'm going to use. And so it's an exercise in blue field and green, green space to say, I hear you. I know there's going to be 20 ways to Sunday that's going to change between now and then, but give me your best effort of where you think it needs to be relevant for the problem you're solving. And then we'll go from there.
Okay. Let's go in a slightly different direction right now, and let's talk about where the innovation is happening in the medical industry right now. I mean, there's a number of us who've been in big companies. Several of us are service providers and that sort of thing, so we see startups. We've been part of the big guys. So innovation and fast follower, what's happening in the market space today? And in particular, is the innovation being done? I'll pose a question. Is it being done in the small companies and the big guys are just swallowing them up? Or are the big guys doing a lot of innovation as well? And let's start with Jeff Wyman on that one and work our way down the panel.
The innovation's happening with you, Bill, right here today.
You're gathering time.
I was going to say it's clearly the small companies, and then hand it over to you.
Yeah.
So I think you're seeing a variety of ways to get things done. If you look at in bigger companies, you're going to see a core portfolio where they're looking to most likely iterate off of. And innovation actually is such a broad term that iteration can be confused with innovation, just with incremental changes in product which differ from the very original product that was out there. In our case, you now see bearing surface changes, you see total knee replacements, which are high flexion total knee replacements, where 7 to 10 years ago you didn't see that. But along those lines, to answer your question, there may be elements which can be bolted on to that iteration in the form of small innovation in the case of bolt-on acquisitions. So I think companies are looking at different ways of growing a little more creatively than just purely organic development. In our case, we're looking at it threefold. We look at it from an organic development perspective, more towards more of iterative changes in devices, although there are some innovative changes that have happened in the last 5 or 7 years that I can think of. And then secondly is, the small bolt-on acquisitions are out there. But one of the points that, I think that we need to understand is that for any of these changes that are occurring, whether they are being innovative or iterative, whether they're bolt-on or whether they're large-scale company acquisitions, is really the changes that we've seen in the back-end funding of clinical research and validation of claims, regardless of what the device is and the inherent costs associated with that. Getting back to what Jeff was saying earlier about claim language is now very specific and has to have some proof of merit to it. And so I think the struggles that we see now are also tied into the fact that with the amount of cost pressures there are now in medical devices and the overall consumptive costs tied into medical care delivery, we're starting to see a squeeze at the very top on the R side of things, where the clinical-based research or the innovative research has seemingly shrunk a little bit. So that's one of the reasons why companies are looking at creative ways of growing their portfolio.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, I know you've got the other Jeff, I know you've got some thoughts on this one as well. Do you want to tackle that?
I think Jeff is right. Innovation comes in many forms, and even though we tend to gravitate to new products and whatnot as the form of innovation, you can actually see a lot of innovation in the manufacturing area. So when you go from a 128 to 256 cavitation mold and you drop 10% out of your product price, well, that's huge. That can afford the sales force an opportunity to lower price, go for volume, get better profitability. That entails regulatory. That entails a lot of other things that go with that. So I think big companies are uniquely poised for that type of innovation and all the downstream effects of doing that. They just have the muscle, they have the ability, they see it, and they can leverage it. I think small companies are really challenged to do that kind of work. I agree with Jeff. We also talk about innovation. There's the whole regulatory strategy. That's not specific to a product per se, but it's how you think about approving products, sequencing of it. How do you manage portfolios across the world where you have different revs of products? That's a manufacturing and a quality nightmare, but also there's a lot of regulatory strategy in the sequence of how you do that. I think when it comes to the classic sense of innovation of a new disruptive technology, honestly, I think it's more of the outside, the small companies that are holding sway. And there's some challenges that Jeff alluded to. In the big companies, the R, I always call it little r, big D. Little r is now getting squeezed even harder for a number of reasons. And most companies are not like Smith & Nephew, where they've segregated out the innovation portal to do that. Most of them are integrated, and either they're within each business unit or there's some corporate infrastructure. Those groups are always under pressure from a financial standpoint. I think it's also a challenge for the big companies to look at the unpredictability and manage that for high-risk, high-reward type products that are, by definition, revolutionary. So I think they're much more willing to use their balance sheet as opposed to their P&L, which is what is required on a new technology. If you're going to invest in some IP, that's a balance sheet issue, as opposed to a P&L issue, as opposed to a balance sheet issue. When the technology is further downstream, they can use their cash, they can step in when it's further de-risked. And that's what I see occurring more and more.
Okay, thank you. Annie, you guys see a lot of different clients and customers. Where are you seeing some of the most innovation done? Big, small, any general reflection on that?
Well, I think it's still the 80-20 rule still applies. I still believe that. I think what's going on with consolidation in our healthcare environment. But I think you're right. The smaller companies have a little more bandwidth and leeway and less supply chain pressures to really go after projects that they very much believe in. They might only have 1 or 2 projects a year that they put all their eggs in one basket. But yeah, I think we unfortunately are seeing some of our top medical companies really get squeezed on the R, and that's, I think, unfortunate, because then they're, for example, a large medical device company I worked with had to take 4 different divisions of R&D and put them into one. And we worked with them, and they came to me and said, I said, well, why us? Why are you coming to me? And they said, because we don't know what this does. I got brought in from a different division, and that's why we're coming to you, because we heard your company is the expert in this, and so we partner with them. I think that's unfortunate. At Proto Labs, yeah, we see we work with thousands of startups, and it's very, very fun, but at the end of the day, their goal is to be purchased. So our job is to help them get something to market quickly and safely. But yeah, I think it's to both points. I think the R is getting smaller, which is pushing more startups, but I think there's tons, to Jeff Wyman's point, there's lots of innovation in the supply chain to make it more cost effective as well. So I think all good things at the end for the patient, but it's a lot more complex than it used to be.
And Scott, I know you see a big variety of clients as well. What are your thoughts on where the innovation is happening today?
Yeah, we do, and it is across the board, and so my tendency, I see a lot of the startup companies, of course, and they're putting 2 and 2 together where they can see unmet need and pairing a solution, and I see requests from the larger companies where it's like, hey, this innovation piece, we know, we'll give you, we know how the impact, we've got the data on the market and the current state of the art and everything. What we need is somebody to stir the pot up a little bit. What would you do if you were starting from first principles here? And so that's not that, but I think it's helpful also to have a framework when thinking about innovation. I like to come at this from, I don't think it means that intrinsically large companies can't do it, but they have to set the stage for creativity to happen. And some of my latest thinking on is that when we're trying to be creative and have these breakthroughs beyond just the iterative advancements, we're really asking the human brain to do a tricky bit of kind of threading the needle, right? Because we're kind of bound on 2 sides. On one side, we've got common sense, and if I'm an engineer, so I can, I'm trained mechanical engineer. You be your pattern recognizer. You get to see, that's how we always do whatever, suturing, or that's how we always do this certain approach. And so we'll start there, and then we'll go from that. And the problem is, if it's common sense, it's the brain being lazy and making a bunch of leaps, and so you're skipping steps. You're not going to get the innovative leap. If on the other side you're bounded by the complexity of some of these jobs. We're not going to, when we're presented with global warming, we're like, oh my God, where do I even start, right? And in the same way, if you just came to a group and said, hey, we're going to, say 50 years ago, we're just going to put in new heart valves without opening up the chest, go. They'd be like, okay, let me give you 100 reasons why that's not going to work, right? And so you need to break these problems down into achievable size. Well, first let's get into the vascular. How are we going to get into the aorta? How are we going to, when we get there, what are we going to do? And then lastly, maybe we'll worry about how we're going to run that down a tube. And if you can break the problems up, you can actually make a lot of progress. And I think it's the innovator's challenge to thread these needles. It's like brain science. How do you manage these problems? Put your team in a place where they feel safe. And of course, naturally, with the larger companies, if you're splitting time between keeping the line up and then trying to think of the next product, that's a tough place to be, right? Because you feel like every time you're thinking about something new, you're wasting, you're exposing the company to an immediate loss if something goes down on the line. So there's some dynamics there that take some really intentional thought, I think, from the larger groups to set up that innovation fostering.
Okay, I promised we were going to save some time for questions, so start gathering up your questions. I don't know if we have a mic in here or not, but while we're checking on that, I promised that each of you that in 3 words or less, this is the speed round, what are the key takeaways you want to leave for the audience on this topic while we do the questions, that sort of stuff. So, Annie, you're first. What are your takeaways?
I just say communication saves time and makes you fast. The more you communicate amongst yourselves and with your partners, the faster you will be. I think that's ultimately the driver. And in our technology-driven world, we're so quick to email and text, and I know this is the millennial saying that, but I really believe communication still drives a lot of what we can do quickly. And the more we talk on the front end, the more you help, you engage your supply chain and the goals, the better off you'll be.
That was a lot for 3 words.
I'm sorry.
So, no, that's okay. That's okay. Scott.
Structure allows creativity, and I guess we'll go to Q&A for
All right.
elaborate
Jeff.
on that. But.
I'm going to use 4. I'm an innovation optimist, not an innovation pessimist.
Okay.
There's still a lot of room out there for great creative ideas.
All right. And Jeff.
Product definition rules.
All right, very good. Questions from the audience now. You're going to steal one of these mics? Yeah. Questions from the audience, please. Raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you, but let's do this as quickly as we possibly can. So, there's one over there, there's one over there. We'll go there and you're next.
Thank you. Can you just, a word of advice on how to optimize IP development and production while you innovate in engineering and other aspects of the startup or company?
Is that for any specific one or a general question?
Any general question.
Who wants to handle that?
Jeff Grosse.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I think the first thing I would say is sit down and understand where do you want to market your products. Japan is very expensive. China is an iffy proposition. The U.S., the big 5, right, in Europe. The second thing is a strategy of do you have one killer patent or do you need to distribute it over a range? And then the sequencing and timing of those patents, you can file and then hold publication. You can do things fairly inexpensively to get your place in line without spending a lot of money. If you have basically one patent, it's one idea, one molecule, then it makes sense to push and get that executed and cleared as fast as you can. But be cognizant of the costs around the world.
One of the challenges for us in medical as well is in the IP world, you're talking about new, novel, unique, et cetera. And then when you go to the FDA, often you're arguing, well, it's very similar to what went before, and this is what happened. So in our field, more than anything else, we have an issue between IP and novel, and well, it's a lot like what we've done before.
But clearly the competition did not reduce to practice, so it's obviated.
Yes, that's right. Question?
you've been talking about innovation, but it really needs to get to patients, physicians, whoever are going to be the users. How early do you evaluate an invention for value, for reimbursement, for cost, as part of your decision making, whether it's going to be a fail-fast product or not?
Who wants to handle that one? Jeff?
So, you know, there's two areas you have to think about. One is if this is, if you're dealing with a new product, a new 510K or a CE submission into a particular OUS type area, generally speaking, as a part of your decision for scaling that product, you're really going to pay attention to what the market-bearing costs are, and what the reimbursement strategy is, and whether your inherent claims are supported with the appropriate clinical literature.
In other words, I'll add to it. I'll simplify it. I'll say start early. As someone who's developed that, if you're not involving the people early in that part of the decision process, one of our panelists said earlier, you can spend a lot of money going down a path. So getting the clients, the physicians, the users, the patients, and all of those things, reimbursement strategy. We didn't focus a lot on that here because we could spend all day talking about that. It's very important to hit it as early as you possibly can.
Bill, if I can briefly add.
Go ahead.
Because usability engineering is one of the things we offer, and the guidance there comes from kind of a formative, collect the needs, collect the issues, details on the problem, and who the users are, and then in a summative portion, you kind of validate, and you can do those, you know, throughout. You know, you can really get a lot of sense even in the formative stage of how is this going to be received by your intended users. And while they may not be, you know, experts on the regulatory side, they're going to tell you would they use it or would they not? Are they going to be champions for it? And I think that, you know, from our side, that's the part from the technical side that we can add a lot of confidence, I guess, going forward.
Real quick, because we have time for one more question, but go ahead. And
I agree that the need to speak early with clinicians and other healthcare providers to understand what the problem you're trying to solve is. But I think the further you are on the revolutionary scale, you have to be careful because you get groupthink. So if I approached 10 cardiac surgeons, world-renowned, and said, I'm going to go make a TAVI heart valve, their response is, I don't need it. So is that a valued response? So I think you have to be careful of the question you're asking and how it's phrased.
Okay, one more question right here.
I think Andy and Scott have kind of touched upon my question from the supplier side, but as medical device manufacturers, to Jeff's, I'd like to ask you, how do you view the role of your suppliers in the innovation process?
Go ahead, either Jeff or both.
The role of suppliers is extremely important, particularly if you're working outside of an inherent competency. In our particular case, if we have a competency which we want to utilize but as a standard run competency, we may not have access to that standard run competency, so we'll have to look for outside suppliers to do the work for us.
All right. Jeff, did you have anything to add to that?
Well, I just think, you know, this goes to the overall strategy about supply chain and having single or dual sourcing and looking always where your competency versus core competencies are. And oftentimes, I think companies make the mistake of saying they are core competent when they're not, and they should leverage outside OEM suppliers to really bridge that gap.
Okay, I'd like to leave you with one thought on innovation, and we touched on it up here. Be careful where you look for innovation, because it can be in process, it can be in the device, it can be in the way of using things. And I was at a conference a year ago with Manny Villafana, and Manny, for those of you who, he's a serial entrepreneur, noted probably most for St. Jude and the acquisition of it by Abbott for $30 billion. But he was getting an award, and he gave a talk on innovation and the things he was doing. And I asked him the question. I had the unfortunate task of following him on the stage to give a talk. It was a challenge, but I asked him the question, Manny, of all the things you're seeing, what's really innovative for you? And I expected some neat, novel, new device and all of this, and he had one he'd been working on. And he said, well, what really needs innovation in medical is we need to figure out how to get organs to where they need to be transplanted. And that was one of the things that he said, that would really revolutionize medical care. and in days where we can deliver packages overnight or in the same day. It was just an interesting thought. So be careful where you look for innovation. It's all around us. We've touched on it today. Please join me in thanking the panel for a great job, and I know we'd all love to answer your questions later.